conflict-related detainees in the opening of additional roads for the first time in many years. These developments are incremental and hard-won. We acknowledge the efforts made by a variety of actors, from the Special Envoy's Office to the International Committee of the Red Cross, countries in the region, and crucially, by local mediators, in taking steps forward on the range of sensitive issues. We hope to see further progress on these issues in the near future. President, in conclusion, Slovenia hopes that the parties to the conflict in Yemen will abandon what the Special Envoy has described as zero-sum mindset. At a volatile time in the region, we call for all actors to avoid inflammatory and threatening statements and actions, and to engage constructively with the UN efforts towards finalizing a roadmap and reaching an inclusive intra-Yemeni process. A return to war will not serve the Yemeni people or the people of the region. I thank you.
I thank Slovenia for their statement and now give the floor to Ecuador.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, President. I want to thank the briefings by Special Envoy Grunberg and Acting Coordinator Suya, and I welcome the representative of Yemen in this room. Mr. President, I will focus my statement on 4 points. First of all, my country continues to be very concerned about the violence provoked by the attacks of the Houthis against Israel. These attacks, together with continued hostilities in the Red Sea, are contrary to international law and have no justification. They threaten to erode the mediation opportunities to implement the roadmap. They also exacerbate the regional conflict and deepen the humanitarian crisis that the Yemeni people are suffering. It's urgent for the Security Council to maintain a unified position of condemning the attacks perpetrated by the Houthis and demand their immediate cessation. In addition, the Council must expedite the implementation of the arms embargo established pursuant to Resolution 2216. Secondly, I'd like to highlight the conclusion of the 9th meeting of the Supervisory Committee on the implementation of the detainees agreement, in which was agreed to release Mohammed Katan and to hold a follow-up meeting to finalize the list of detainees to be freed. Ecuador would join the appeals for the parties to refrain from carrying out arbitrary detentions. I would like to reiterate our concern regarding the detention by the Houthis of humanitarian workers as well as the crew of the Galaxy Leader, which should be released immediately and unconditionally. Thirdly, and as warned by the Special Envoy Grunberg in his briefing, the banking sector of Yemen continues to be affected by the simultaneous operation of 2 monetary authorities. This situation leads to severe impact on the economy of Yemen and the purchasing power of people. This could only deepen food insecurity that already affects more than 2/3 of the population, of which approximately 2.4 million are children. Fourthly, Ecuador commends the intensification of efforts by humanitarian organizations to confront the outbreak of cholera, as well as the meeting held on the 14th of July between representatives of the UN and Yemeni officials in Aden to discuss the humanitarian challenges facing the country. Nevertheless, the humanitarian response plan has obtained less than 1/4 of the required amount. The financial support for humanitarian organizations is essential to address the urgent needs of the population. To conclude, and in spite of increase in tensions, Ecuador would like to reiterate that political intra-Yemeni dialogue under the aegis of the United Nations is the only path towards a sustainable peace in Yemen. This is what I'd like to reiterate our support for the work of Special Envoy Grunberg. Thank you very much.
I thank Ecuador for their statement. Now I'll give the floor to Japan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank Special Envoy Grunberg and Jim Suya for their informative briefings and their dedicated work. 10 years into the conflict, the situations in and around Yemen remains highly complex and difficult, which is amplified by the alarming developments over the past few days. For today's meeting, let me focus on 4 points. First and foremost, as we stated yesterday, Japan would like to reiterate a strong condemnation of the recent drone attack on Tel Aviv by the Houthis. We are seriously concerned about the current situation and calls for no further escalation. The Houthis must immediately stop their threats and hostile rhetoric against Israel, which are further destabilizing the Middle East. Second, Japan unequivocally condemns that the Houthis have detained more than 10 personnel from UN agencies and INGOs and many others supporting humanitarian activities and deny any access to them for over a month. These detentions directly impede critical aid delivery in Houthis-controlled areas where the Yemeni people are suffering from dire shortage of food, medicine, and other basic human needs, as ASG Musuya has just stated. We demand that the Houthis immediately and unconditionally release not only those detained last month, but also other UN and diplomatic mission staff they have held in captivity for years. The Houthis must also stop their disinformation campaigns and other impediments to humanitarian aid workers who are working tirelessly to alleviate the suffering of Yemenis. Third, Japan is outraged by the ongoing Houthis attack in the Red Sea and surrounding waters. These persistent and ruthless attacks have killed innocent civilians, sunk commercial vessels, and disrupted global maritime transportation. Our indignation also extends to the Houthis for their continued detention of the 25 crew members of the Galaxy Reader for more than 8 months. Once again, the Houthis must immediately cease their threats to international shipping and unconditionally release the Galaxy Leader and its crew, consistent with the Council's resolutions 2722 and 2739. Fourth and lastly, Japan deeply regrets that the peace process has stagnated over a long time, while the resumption of negotiations on the release of prisoners, as well as the latest announcement that the government of Yemen and the Houthis agreed on several measures, are positive developments. We urge all parties concerned to create a conducive environment for peace talks under UN auspices. Japan continues to support the work of the Special Envoy towards lasting peace in Yemen. I thank you.
I thank Japan for their statement and now give the floor to China.
Thank you, President. I thank Special Envoy Grunberg and Acting Under-Secretary General Musuya for their briefings. I welcome the presence of the representative of Yemen at today's meeting. The settlement of the Yemeni question requires political and diplomatic means. China hopes that all parties concerned will stay the course of political solution, build consensus, meet each other halfway, jointly promote a Yemeni-led and owned comprehensive political process, and resolve tensions and differences through dialogue and negotiation. The international community should provide assistance and play a constructive role in this regard. Recently, thanks to the good offices of Special Envoy Grunberg, the Yemeni government and the Houthis held talks on prisoner exchange. Yesterday, with regard to financial and airline sectors, the Yemeni parties reached an agreement. China welcomes those positive developments. The ongoing tensions in the Red Sea are unsettling. We once again urge the Houthis to respect the right of navigation of commercial vessels under international law in the Red Sea, cease assaults, and maintain safe navigation in the Red Sea. At the same time, we also call on other relevant parties to maintain restraint and halt any actions that may exacerbate tensions. The humanitarian situation in Yemen remains grim. The international community should scale up humanitarian and development assistance to Yemen, support and help the people and government of Yemen to develop the country's economy and improve living conditions. China expresses its serious concern over the detention of UN personnel in Yemen. We call for the immediate and unconditional release of all UN personnel. President, the tensions in the Red Sea are a somber manifestation of the spillover of the Gaza conflict. The recent attacks between the Houthis and Israel have led to more precarious escalation. China calls for the full and effective implementation of the Security Council's relevant resolutions on Yemen and the promotion of an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. All parties should exercise restraint, avoid further escalation, and prevent plunging the entire region into an even greater catastrophe. China stays committed to working with the international community and making unremitting efforts for the political settlement of the Yemeni question and maintenance of peace and stability in the Middle East. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China, and I now give the floor to France.
Merci.
Thank you. I thank Hans Grunberg and Joyce Msuya for the briefings. I would also like to welcome the presence here of the permanent representative of Yemen. Mr. President, as we have stressed yesterday, Houthis must immediately cease their destabilizing activities in the region. These are unacceptable. France reiterates our strong condemnation of the drone attack which targeted Tel Aviv on the night of from the 18th to the 19th of July, claimed by the Houthis. We'd like to address our condolences to the relatives of the victims and express our support for the wounded. Houthis, supported by the Islamic Republic of Iran, must immediately cease their attacks that fuel regional escalation, including in the Red Sea and in the Gulf of Aden. This council has condemned these attacks, in particular by adopting Resolution 2622 and 2739. States have the right to defend their ships against these attacks in accordance with international law. By these actions, Houthis bear a heavy responsibility for regional escalation. We call on the Houthis to put an end to these and immediately release the Galaxy leader and its crew, which have been detained since November of 2023. France will continue its involvement in the framework of the European Operation Aspides to ensure maritime security and the freedom of navigation in conformity with international law and in coordination with its partners. Houthis have irresponsible conduct, which also has disastrous consequences for the people of Yemen. They are leading an economic war against a legitimate government and are diverting humanitarian aid in the area under their control. In June, Houthis conducted unprecedented arbitrary arrests against workers of the United Nations and local international NGOs. France strongly condemns this and demands their release. These actions are very serious and hinder the action of the organizations on the ground. They face numerous restrictions imposed on the territory controlled by Houthis and at the expense of the local population. Women are particularly targeted by these restrictions. It is unacceptable that the World Food Program was forced by the Houthis to suspend their activities which are meant to cover the urgent needs of the civilian population. Houthis must cease to commit abuses against their own population that they're suffocating economically and threaten on a daily basis. We must think together with the UN agencies on the means of providing humanitarian assistance to civilians in areas controlled by Houthis. Humanitarian personnel must be able to conduct their operations in a secure and unhindered way. Mr. President, and at the security level, we must achieve a complete cessation, lasting cessation of hostilities to avoid any resumption of conflict on the ground. Houthis must stop sabotaging the efforts of the special envoy, to which France expresses full support in implementing the roadmap. Effective participation of Yemeni women in negotiations must be ensured. Thank you.
I thank France for their statement, and I give the floor to the United States.
Thank you, Special Envoy Grunberg and Acting USG Masuya, for your briefings. The United States shares your assessment that the Houthis' actions in Yemen and the region are increasingly challenging peace and stability. Special Envoy Grunberg, my delegation is hopeful that any agreement by the parties reached will result in true de-escalation on the part of the Houthis. Yemenis need the support of the international community, and yet the Houthis continue taking steps that make it more difficult. As we discussed yesterday, the Houthis have launched approximately 200 missiles and drones towards Israel in recent months with no regard for civilian lives. The Houthis' July 19 drone strike in the heart of Tel Aviv, using what appears to be an Iranian-made Samad 3 UAV, is just another case of the Houthis flouting the demands of this council to cease attacks and Iran violating the UN arms embargo. Turning to the recently detained humanitarian personnel, we repeat our call for the immediate release and condemn the Houthi actions. Sadly, this is not the first instance in which the Houthis detained international personnel, foreign nationals, and religious minorities. The Houthis have detained without justification U.S. local staff for more than 2.5 years, 4 UN staff for over 2 years, and 25 crewmen from the Galaxy Leader for over 8 months. 4 Yemeni Bahia also remain in detention after more than 1 year. We reject the notion that the Houthis should be given time to conduct so-called investigations before releasing people that have been illegally detained. The Houthis are not a government and have no capacity to investigate anything. Their efforts to use disinformation to distract from their own failures reflect the blatant disregard they have for the Yemeni people. At this time, we believe that the UN and international community cannot continue business as usual. We believe it is time that the Security Council speak with one voice and demand the immediate and safe release of all detained Yemeni personnel from the United Nations, national and international non-governmental organizations, diplomatic missions, and civil society, all of whom were working to improve the lives of the Yemeni people by bringing life-saving assistance to their country at the time of their detention. The facts are known, and the Secretary General has been clear about what the Houthis must do. It is time that we support his call for their immediate and unconditional release. We must support the UN agencies operating in Yemen as they determine the necessary next steps to protect their personnel in light of the deteriorating security environment. We must also come together to demand that the Houthis cease their reckless attacks in the Red Sea, Gulf of Aden, and surrounding waterways in violation of Resolution 2722. The Houthis' increasingly brazen and opportunistic attacks call into question their intention to abide by a future UN roadmap for peace. Colleagues, the Houthis and their Iranian sponsors are responsible for jeopardizing a political resolution of Yemen's conflict. We must keep up international pressure on them. We must also take steps to deny the Houthis the weapons and supplies, particularly the critical materiel they have long received from Iran in contravention of the UN arms embargo established in Resolution 2216. We were pleased that UNMAHA's mandate was extended last month, allowing it to continue ceasefire monitoring patrols in the Red Sea off the coast of Yemen. We once again call for the strengthening of UNVIM and urge more countries to step up and provide financial assistance to support this critical mandate. It is unacceptable that numerous vessels have docked at Houthi-controlled ports without inspection in the past year. Violators of the arms embargo should know that this council is determined to enforce its resolutions and to impose costs for supplying arms to the Houthis. As members of the international community, we must also redouble efforts to stop the illicit smuggling of weapons. Yemen has long deserved a better future, and we were hopeful just a year ago this country would begin to see it. This goal remains elusive, and the path to peace and prosperity is now at risk because of Houthi actions. Thank you.
I now give the floor to Malta.
Thank you, President. I also thank Special Envoy Grunberg and Acting USG Masuya for their briefings. As emphasized yesterday, Malta remains deeply concerned about the escalations posed by the recent developments. We firmly condemn the Houthi claimed drone attack on Tel Aviv of 19 July and call on the Houthis to immediately cease all attacks. We similarly call on them to cease their attacks against commercial shipping in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. The retaliatory airstrikes by Israel in and around the port of Hodeidah left many victims and casualties whilst causing considerable damage to civilian infrastructure. This is concerning. We once again underscore that all parties are obliged to protect civilians under international law. Hodeidah port is a lifeline for millions of people in Yemen who rely heavily on imports of essential items such as food, medicine, and fuel. It is critical for the port to be open and operating. Moreover, Hodeidah port is in a densely populated urban center where thousands of people live. Any military campaign in its vicinity risks having devastating consequences for civilians. Ongoing military action in the region risks disrupting ongoing mediation efforts. They hamper progress towards a formal nationwide ceasefire and a broader political solution to the conflict in Yemen. The resumption of an inclusive, Yemeni-led and owned political process with the full, equal, meaningful and safe participation of women remains key. Given the risks of broader conflict in the Middle East, it is essential for all parties to exercise restraint, to de-escalate, and to pursue peaceful solutions to all disputes. Malta condemns the arrests and arbitrary detentions conducted by the Houthis of UN personnel, civil society, and staff working for non-governmental organizations and diplomatic missions in Yemen. These individuals must be immediately and unconditionally released. All parties to the conflict must fully comply with their obligations under international law and international humanitarian law, including the prohibition against the arbitrary deprivation of liberty. This situation is having far-reaching ramifications on the delivery of humanitarian aid into and throughout Yemen, at a time when the country suffers heightened levels of food insecurity. We call on all parties to ensure unimpeded and timely humanitarian access to those in need, as well as a safe operating environment for humanitarian actors. We further call on the international community to support a robust response to Yemen's humanitarian crisis and urgently scale up funding for Yemen's humanitarian response plan. President, Malta welcomes the convening of the Supervisory Committee on the implementation of the Detainees Agreement. We call on parties to continue to engage on this matter to fulfill their commitment to the Stockholm Agreement to release all conflict-related detainees and those arbitrarily detained. We also welcome the Council's recent renewal of UNMHA, UNHMA, which performs crucial work supporting the Hodeidah Agreement. The economic war that has been conducted by parties to the conflict has fragmented and destabilized Yemen's economy and currency. Such actions have caused inflation to rise and surging the prices of essential goods, serving as a major driver of suffering. We are all pleased with the announcement last night that the government of Yemen and the Houthis agreed on several measures to de-escalate in relation to the banking sector and Yemeni Airways. We echo the Special Envoy for the need for the parties to collaborate towards an economy that benefits all Yemenis and supports the implementation of a nationwide ceasefire and the resumption of an inclusive political process. In conclusion, President, Malta is deeply concerned by the political, humanitarian, and economic situation in Yemen. We urge parties to constructively engage with the Office of the Special Envoy on commitments made to the UN roadmap. We echo the Secretary General in expressing our deep appreciation for the invaluable work done by UN personnel and partners to try to alleviate the suffering of the Yemeni people. I thank you.
Я благодарю Мальту за их заявление.
I thank Malta for your statement, and I give the floor to the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would also like to extend my gratitude to Special Envoy Hans Grunberg and Acting USG Joyce Msuya for the informative updates. I also welcome the participation of the representative of Yemen. As I said yesterday, the Middle East remains in danger of conflict escalation. Now, the situation in and around Yemen is further deteriorating as we continuously witness the Houthis' dangerous actions. In this regard, the Republic of Korea once again strongly condemns the Houthis' drone attack on Tel Aviv, as well as their ongoing attacks on vessels in Red Sea and the broader region. We call on Houthis to immediately cease all such illegal and reckless activities, which only complicate the strenuous efforts toward peaceful political settlement in Yemen. In addition, we demand the immediate and unconditional release of all detainees, including UN, international and national NGOs, and diplomatic personnel. Arbitrary detentions are simply unacceptable under any circumstances. We also strongly urge the Houthis to ensure the safety of all detainees and provide access to their families, as holding them incommunicado with no due process amounts to enforced disappearances. Mr. President, the Republic of Korea expresses grave concerns over the deteriorating economic conditions in Yemen. The Houthis' hostile economic measures, followed by countermeasures from the Yemeni government, are exacerbating the liquidity crisis. As the USGMCR described in detail, the potential banking and financial sector crisis, coupled with ongoing currency depreciation and decreased purchasing power, could further restrict the Yemeni people's access to vital commodities such as food, fuel, and medicine. In the medium and long term, this tit-for-tat escalation would pose an increased risk of heightened food insecurity and hunger for Yemeni people, disproportionately impacting women and children. In this regard, we welcome the financial de-escalation deal between the Yemeni government and Houthis, which was just announced this morning. We hope that both parties will live up to their commitments for all Yemeni people. Despite this positive development, taking into account the dire humanitarian situation on the ground, we still believe the international community must refocus its sustained attention on the deteriorating humanitarian situation in Yemen. The Korean government has continuously delivered humanitarian assistance to the people in need in Yemen to enhance food and nutritional security. At the pledging event for the humanitarian crisis in Yemen last year, we announced our humanitarian aid amounting to $18.5 million, including in-kind contributions of rice. We will continue our active contributions to support Yemen's humanitarian needs this year as well. Achieving economic stability across Yemen is crucial for realizing a peaceful political transition and comprehensively addressing the dire humanitarian situation. In this context, we reaffirm our unwavering support for Special Envoy Grunberg's tireless efforts in tackling these ongoing challenges through his continuous engagement on the ground, both in political and economic fronts, and in advancement of an inclusive Yemeni-led political transition under UN auspices. It is imperative for all Yemeni parties, especially the Houthis, to commit to a faithful negotiation process and lay the groundwork for a concrete and sustainable political settlement to forge a brighter future for the Yemeni people. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for the statement, and I now will make a statement in my capacity as representative of the Russian Federation.
We thank Special Envoy of the Secretary General for Yemen, Hans Grunberg, and the Acting Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Joyce Msuya, for their briefings on the political and humanitarian situation in the country. We are gravely concerned by the current situation in Yemen, particularly its humanitarian aspects. According to UN estimates, more than 18 million people, or 2/3 of the country's population, are in need of some form of humanitarian assistance. The armed conflict, albeit relatively low intensity, and the resulting economic instability have placed a heavy burden on ordinary citizens. The most significant impact has been on the agricultural and food sector, which could have kept the situation afloat in one way or another. Food prices have risen so much that they have become inaccessible to the most vulnerable groups. There is an ongoing major funding shortfall for humanitarian programs. This year, only 23% of the UN response plan needs have been mobilized. As the Yemeni settlement process continues to be in a deadlock for the last 6 months, the situation on the ground is also rapidly deteriorating. The number of clashes along the contact line continues to grow. The nature of the incidents remains local for now, but we see this trend as a potentially explosive one. It is easy to miss the point when the point of no return has been crossed and Yemeni stakeholders gradually move away from a constructive approach aimed at developing acceptable normalization parameters, a resumption of a lasting and comprehensive ceasefire, and moving to a full-fledged political process in the country. It is extremely important to continue active and inclusive political and diplomatic efforts with all parties to the Yemeni conflict. We are prepared to continue providing the necessary assistance to Special Envoy Greenberg in this regard, maintaining close contact with them and encouraging restraint and a reaching of agreements. We believe it is also important to continue the practice of small steps aimed at overcoming mistrust between the parties. This will include the need to update the international legal parameters for the settlement so that they reflect realities on the ground. The situation in Yemen is exacerbated by the ongoing turbulence in the Middle East as a whole, which is experiencing these shocks due to the unprecedented brutality of Israel's actions in Gaza. Last week, we witnessed a Houthi attack on Tel Aviv and an Israeli retaliatory strike on Hodeidah. During the Council's discussion of this issue yesterday, we witnessed the selective blindness of our colleagues who persistently tried to ignore the elephant in the room. While there's no justification for such actions on the part of Ansar Allah, nor their attacks on commercial vessels in the Red Sea, one cannot ignore the fact that the primary and main reason for the spillover of the Yemeni crisis beyond the borders of that country is the ongoing slaughter in Gaza, which has already claimed nearly 40,000 innocent Palestinian lives. We consistently and unfailingly support the establishment of an immediate, unconditional, and comprehensive ceasefire in the sector, the release of hostages and detained Palestinians. Ending the violence in Gaza will allow the region to breathe a sigh of relief and lay the foundations for a transition to a long-lasting peace and stability. In our view, this cause and effect relationship is absolutely clear, and denying it is pointless. Yemen will finally be able to focus on its domestic agenda, resolve existing political differences, and move to redressing the dire humanitarian situation in the country. The support of the international community is a key factor for Yemen and the Yemeni people in these conditions. But some states, instead of working on calming the situation, are trying to put out the fire with fuel and prioritizing the use of force. This applies first and foremost to the situation in the Red Sea, where the so-called coalition led by the US and the UK is carrying out open aggression against Yemen. And even though attacks on the territory of the sovereign Middle Eastern country have been ongoing for nearly 6 months, they have had no impact whatsoever on the military capabilities of the Houthis, as we have clearly seen with their attack on Tel Aviv. Moreover, they have had the opposite effect. The credibility of the movement's region in the region has been strengthened, and the intensity of strikes against commercial vessels has increased. Was this the goal that the US and their allies were pursuing? Russia decisively rejects the use of force to influence the Yemeni parties. At the same time, we consistently advocate the need to ensure the safety and security of international navigation and condemn any actions that threaten the safety of ships. We call in particular for the release of the MV Galaxy Leader and its crew. At the same time, we are convinced that the path towards de-escalation in the Red Sea includes ending the violence in Gaza and promoting an intra-Yemeni settlement, especially given that both of these goals are stipulated in the decisions of the Security Council. We once again urge our Western colleagues to focus on the implementation of these goals rather than digging themselves deeper into futile military escapades, which only serve to rapidly weaken your credibility in the region, which has already been undermined by your blind support for Israel. I now resume my function as the President of the Council, and I give the floor to Yemen.
السيد الرئيس
Mr. President, allow me first to congratulate you on your presidency of this council during the current month, and I wish you success. I thank your predecessor, the permanent representative of the Republic of Korea. I thank him for his presidency of the council last month. I would also like to thank Madam Masuya and Mr. Grunberg for their briefings. Mr. President, the government of Yemen strongly condemns the Israeli aggression and Israel's violation of the sovereignty of Yemeni territory in a blatant violation of the United Nations Charter and international law and all international norms and regulations. We hold Israel fully responsible for any repercussions that result from their aerial strikes. We warn the terrorist Houthi militias of the dangers of continuing to hold hostage Yemen and its peoples and dragging them into its futile battles to serve the interests of the Iranian regime and its expansionist project in the region. Moreover, we warn Iran and Israel of any attempt to transform the Yemeni territories through rogue militias into a battlefield for their wars and their destructive projects in the region. We call upon this esteemed council and the international community to shoulder their responsibilities to protect and preserve international peace and security, because the only path to this goal comes through supporting the Yemeni government in its efforts to establish its control over all Yemeni territory and to implement international legitimacy resolutions, especially Resolution 2216. Mr. President, the government of Yemen renews its commitment to a peace approach and its continued support to international and regional efforts, especially the intensive mediation efforts being made by our brethren in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Sultanate of Oman, and the efforts made by the Special Envoy of the United Nations Secretary General, all of which aim to achieve a just and comprehensive peace that is built on the terms of reference of the agreed-upon political solution, namely the GCC initiative, its implementation mechanism, the outcome of the Comprehensive National Dialogue Conference, and relevant United Nations resolutions, especially 2216. We call upon the Houthi militias to stop importing external interference and to stop their destructive approach and all forms of military violence and escalations, and to stop their persistent effort to abort peace efforts and to prolong the war in Yemen and the region and jeopardize international peace and security. We warn the Houthi militias of the dangers of returning to a comprehensive escalation choice and returning matters to square one. This would only multiply human suffering that has existed for too long. It would destroy what remains of the basic necessities of life and scarce livelihoods of the Yemeni people. It would waste international and regional efforts seeking to end the war and resume the path of peace, stability, and development. Mr. President, the Houthi militias continue to perpetrate violations against humanitarian and relief work in the areas under its control. The most recent of these examples is the detention and kidnapping of dozens of employees of the United Nations agencies and international and national NGOs working in Yemen. These include men and women who were kidnapped from their homes, had their properties looted, and their families terrorized. They were forcibly disappeared, and their fate hasn't been disclosed yet, despite more than a month passing since that incident. And this is a great violation of international law and international humanitarian law and a direct threat to the life and safety of these personnel. We warn of the dangers of turning a blind eye to these violations and through which the Houthi militias seek to serve their political agenda and to utilize humanitarian aid to serve their security and military goals, transforming the areas under their control into a prison to all those who oppose its policies. We renew our call to move United Nations offices and the offices of international organizations to the temporary capital, Aden, so as to lighten the pressure imposed by these militias on the work of these organizations and offer a suitable and sound environment for these agencies to perform their duties away from any interferences and with no obstacles or constraints so that humanitarian aid can be delivered to those who need it and who are the most vulnerable. I regret to say that it is our judgment that the measures taken by United Nations offices in Yemen to protect their personnel and save their lives have not been of the level required or even expected to this day, and do not rise to the level of the danger that threatens their lives and freedom. We call upon this Council and the United Nations to exert pressure on the Houthi militias to take urgent measures to guarantee the safety of humanitarian workers and release hostages and detainees with no conditions. Mr. President, the terrorists, the Houthi militias, and since the 25th of June, continue to hold 4 out of the 7 airplanes belonging to the Yemeni Airlines fleet, along with their crews. This is added to the obstacles and violations perpetrated by the militias against the Yemeni Airlines, the national carrier of passengers to and from Yemen, since flights were resumed to and from Sana'a Airport. The terrorist Houthi militias continue to freeze the company's accounts, totaling over $100 million since March 2023. As a result of these violations and these practices by the Houthis against the national airline, the Yemeni Airlines insurance company, Access Specialty Limited, has informed us that it will cancel the operation of flights to and from airports operated by the Houthi militias and through the airspace under the control, because the geographic and airspace in areas of under Houthi control is considered high risk from an insurance perspective and is a threat to passenger and aviation safety. And should flights be resumed and operated, then the liability coverage for the company will be altered from 100% to 81%. This will impose additional losses and burdens on the Yemeni Airlines in a manner that would make it unable to survive. And this would disable Yemenis and would not allow them to travel to and from Yemen, and this would further exacerbate economic burdens and the humanitarian crisis. You realize that this current problem with Yemeni Airlines is one of the repercussions of resuming flights to and from Sana'a Airport as an element of the humanitarian ceasefire sponsored by the United Nations since April 2022. And therefore, we call upon your esteemed Council to undertake its responsibilities and take the necessary measures to make the militia Houthis abide by ending these practices and violations, and to immediately release the airplanes and their technical crews and the frozen funds, so that we would prevent a stop to the flights operated by the national carrier to and from Yemen and exacerbate the suffering of Yemenis. The coup that the Houthi militias have launched against the Yemeni state and the outcomes of the Comprehensive National Dialogue Conference and the aspirations of the Yemeni people for security, stability, and development has created a disastrous economic and humanitarian situation and has pushed millions of Yemenis under the poverty line and into the arms of hunger. It has destroyed the infrastructure and killed hundreds of thousands of them, and exacerbated internal displacement, producing 4.5 million IDPs. Yemen has lost approximately 23 years of development gains, and 80% of its population are no longer receiving basic social services. Our GDP has shrunk by half almost, and our economy has lost over $126 billion in the least estimates. And the production and exporting of oil has stopped because of the Houthi attacks on oil installations and oil exporting ports. This has deprived the Yemeni government and people of their most important resources and main sources of income. And faced with this catastrophic scene, Mr. President, the Yemeni government is working on resuming the reforms in the fields of the economy, finance, and government services to confront these challenges and improve livelihoods and contain the deterioration of the national currency and regulate spending. We also aim to support the decisions of the Yemeni Central Bank that aim to protect the banking sector and end fiscal distortions, as well as enhance oversight on banks and their external transactions. We also support the bank as it seeks to respond to the requirements of disclosure and the requirements of combating money laundering and financing of terrorism. Moreover, there are options available to make some progress, especially in light of the support given by regional and international partners within the framework of a comprehensive program for economic recovery, reconstruction, and SDGs. The Yemeni government welcomes the announcement by the Special Envoy on canceling recent decisions against certain banks and the banking sector and the resumption of air flights through Sana'a Airport and sending them to other destinations as needed. At the same time, we believe that this initiative is a way to alleviate the suffering of the Yemeni people. And we hope that this agreement would provide the necessary conditions to establish a constructive debate to end all of the Houthis' destructive measures against the banking sector, the economy, the national currency, and would push them to fulfill their obligations towards the roadmap, especially the resumption of oil exports. In closing, we express our extreme regrets over the stalled negotiations on the prisoner and detainees file recently held in the Sultanate of Oman, and we regret that no chances for an exchange were available because of the intransigence of the Houthi militias. We call upon this council and the international community to shoulder their humanitarian responsibilities and pressure the Houthi militias to deal with this humanitarian file. We confirm our position that all prisoners and detainees and forcibly displaced must be released in accordance with the all-for-all principle. I thank you.
Я благодарю
I thank Yemen for your statement. We've come to the end of the list of speakers now. I invite members of the council to continue discussion of this item in consultations. The meeting is adjourned.